All right, hello everyone, and welcome. My name is Chris Latham, and I'm the course director for game music composition. Welcome to the new month, and hopefully you had a nice holiday break there. It's always good to take a bit of time off from the, not seeing my screen. Good bit of time off for the holidays to rest a bit and then come back at it kind of fresh. So, we have a lot to talk about this afternoon. We will be talking about the class as a whole. In fact, I'll do this part. There we go. Talk about the class as a whole. We will be talking about the flow of our online class times and the assignments for each week. We will talk about the flow of our class overall from week 1 through week 4. We'll spend the second half of the class talking about your first week's assignments, your first game project, your first game composition. And we'll spend the first half of the class here just talking about the kind of direction we're headed and the types of topics and a bit of introduction as a whole. So our main focus this month is to really introduce you to this side of the music industry or the side of the entertainment industry, certainly with a focus on music for games, to show you the types of skills that are involved, the work that is involved in getting your music and sound effects working in a game. To show you the kind of role of a game composer, how you might work with a game client on a game project, the types of information that you might need, the types of work and skills that you bring to the table, and the work that you would do over the course of a project. We talk about what you would need for a project, both what you need from your client and again, what you bring to the table. What sort of information do you use to figure out what type of game it is, the style of the music, the overall range of the project. Is it going to be just you composing inside of the box, or is it going to require specialized musicians or all the way up to a full orchestra? We'll talk about how do you determine what type of music do you need, how much music do you need, where does all of the music go, how does it all fit in the interactive experience of a game. We'll talk about what is the same in the production of music for games and what is unique and different. The elements, the actual creation and the production of the music is still very much the same from all of the other disciplines that you've been going through in the past couple of classes here in your degree program. You talk about music in all of its facets and forms. You talk about music for an album or songwriting. You talk about music for commercial work, whether it's a library or a jingle, or then you have your that's music for media and advanced music for media, which talks about film and television and putting music to an image, and the emotional qualities and thematic ideas that involves. And so this class, we take that same base of skills of it's still music composition, it's still music production, it's still music theory, it's still creation of music, recording music, producing music. It's still the same tool set, your DAWs, your synths, your sample libraries. It's still mixing and automation. And but once the files are bounced out of your DAW, once you create the music, then what do you do with those WAV files to actually get them working into the game? How do you make it so that when somebody has a controller in their hand or they're playing on their computer, so that they click a button or they do a particular action and it creates the appropriate sound? So we will talk about elements of the soundtrack, of a game soundtrack, like the non-linear nature of the music. We'll talk about the difference between linear and non-linear music. The fact that most of the music that you've probably ever listened to, or most of the music that you've probably ever written, and just most music in general out there is in a linear format. Means you hit play and it plays all the way from the beginning to the end of the song or the CD or the album or whatever you're listening to. And it plays through the exact same way. When you are recording your music for an album, you go into the studio or you record however you compose or produce, and you sit and work with your music and make sure you listen back to it over and over again and make sure that you craft the perfect final stereo version or stereo mix of that song, and that is going to be the single or ultimately maybe a full album of your music that is going to be listened to and played back in the exact same way, no matter who listens to it. Every single time you rewind back and play that song, it's going to play back the exact same way. There is a constant structure to the music that we create naturally. Music has a timeline, or music has timing, I guess, bars and beats. It has the constant progression of music. You have a tempo, you have a time signature. We structure our music in verse and chorus, or part A or part B, and we can count bars and beats to know exactly how the music will progress and where it will change. And in a traditional music composition, every single time you rewind back and play it through, it's going to play back in the exact same way, and that is what is known as linear music. So whenever you watch a movie, there is a 2-hour long, if you watch a 2-hour long movie, there is a 2-hour long audio file that's either stereo or 5.1 or whatever the final mix is. And that represents all the music, all the sound effects, and dialogue. And every single time you rewind that movie back and play it through again, it's going to play back the exact same way. That is the linear nature of the music or the audio in general. A game, however, there is not just one audio file that plays back from beginning to end while you're playing a game. You can play a game bring out your phone and play a game for a couple of minutes. You can put a controller in your hand and play for a couple of hours. People get lost in games for many, many hours, days or weeks or months on end. Games can easily have over 100 hours of content, but that doesn't mean that there is a 100-hour long audio file that plays from beginning to end while you are playing the game. Music for a game is made up of lots of little individual files, clips or different cues of music that are switched and rearranged. Some of them play once, some of them loop, some loop endlessly, and will switch and transition and change according to the actions that are going on screen. Oftentimes they might be in the same key, at the same tempo or time signature, so that they transition seamlessly, and it should be as invisible as possible. Sometimes there is a timed piece of music, so you have 2 minutes to solve the puzzle. And if you, so there's a 2-minute long solving puzzle music. And at any point, you're either going to solve the puzzle or reach the end of your 2 minutes, and there's going to be puzzle lost music or whatever. You lost you didn't win, you lose. So there's puzzle lose music. So there can either be a set period of time, or maybe you need to find a secret or open up a treasure chest or something like that. And so you don't know how long it's going to take somebody to find the treasure chest and open it up. So there might be a looping piece of music. Some people might run through your game just blazing through it, very skilled and defeating everything in their path and going from beginning to end very quickly. And some other folks are going to be knocking around and going in circles, knocking into walls, getting defeated over and over again, and taking much, much longer to get through the game. And the game and your music has to account for all of that. So we will talk about the nonlinear nature of music for a game, the fact that you don't ultimately know the progression of the music. You know what's possible. You ultimately will create all of the music. You know generally how the player is going to progress through the game. And some games are very linear. Lots of puzzle games. You have to solve the first puzzle to get to the second puzzle and to solve the third puzzle, or something like a game with levels. Or other games, you can go off in any sort of direction and you have no idea how quickly or when anyone is going to continue going through the story of the game, or going to a particular location or doing a particular thing. So, but your music needs to react when those things happen. You don't know necessarily when things are going to happen, but you have a good idea what can happen. So we will talk about how do you create music when you don't ultimately know the progression of the music, or the timing of the music. We'll talk about how do you create music for a game where the player has control. We'll talk about the interactivity of the music in the game. The fact that the player has ultimate control of what the character does or how they progress through the game. Not only is that the speed, but that is also what they encounter. Some games you can go off an entire path and never experience large other portions of the story. And some people play through every inch of the game, and some people just breeze through as quickly as possible. So basically, the nonlinear nature, the interactive nature of your music allows for a lot of playability and a lot of random, more flexibility in the game score to account for all of the different actions. So these are some of the ideas and concepts that we will discuss. We will discuss how the music is actually created, and then how does the music that you created, how basically the WAV files that you bounced out, what do you do with those to actually get them into the game so that when somebody's playing the game, they hear the correct piece of music or the correct audio file. Overall for the class, my name again is Chris Latham. I'm the course director of the class. I've been with Full Sail for about 15 years now, and started the game music composition class over here in the music production program when that started up. But before that, I was over in the recording arts program, did game audio over there. My history before Full Sail was studio work, production work, audio recording, music recording, dialogue, sound effects, commercial work, television work, and took my knowledge of audio and had always been had a passion for games, and moved my skill set over from just music and then post-production into combining all of that for games. I found a lot more opportunity in the games industry than I ever did over in the music or the post-production industry. And that's a bit of what we'll talk about throughout the month of how do you find clients, how do you keep up with the current projects, the different companies out there, and what types of skill sets or job requirements might you encounter in this type of field. So Whatever you want to chat about, you can get in contact with me through email, through the phone. I think iChat shut down actually over the holiday with AIM, but certainly email's the best. I'm when I'm not so when I'm teaching class on Tuesday and Thursday, I'm at home and away from my office desk phone. So you can call me at my phone, call me at my extension. But if you do get my voicemail, you don't reach me, also send me an email and I can respond much quicker that way. Beyond the class, I have a game audio contracting company called Engine Audio, and I've worked on a number of games over the years. We have EA Sports here in Orlando, Florida, and got in with them after working on a couple of independent projects. So moving from traditional music production and post-production, I started getting involved in independent games. A number of years ago, games really opened up and allowed for the general public to get access to some of the tools for free. And so I already had a skill set in audio, and I applied that to a couple of independent projects, and then used those projects to go find work with EA Sports here in Orlando, and have kept up a relationship with them, working on a number of their different titles, most recently Madden and NBA Live. And then also worked on a multiplayer underwater sharks versus diver game on Steam, it's available on Steam, called Depth, and got some other projects in the works. So basically transitioned from more traditional music and audio production over to games, and been involved in the games industry for a while now. So I do have two quick disclaimers about the class that I want to introduce pretty early on. The first one being that you don't actually have to be any good at playing video games or have much experience playing video games to be successful in this class. I know that there's a wide variety of folks that come through the class with a lot of different experience playing games over the years. Some folks eat, live, and breathe games. They love video games. They're up and playing all the newest and latest things, and they're playing games all the time, and they're interested in game audio and game music and all that stuff. And I am one of those folks. I can certainly nerd out with you all day long, talking about games and talking about the industry and audio and music and all that sort of stuff. I also recognize that there is a large swath of folks going through the class that haven't been playing games since they were throwing quarters into Pac-Man, or playing Minesweeper on their computer, or chess or something like that. And that's also perfectly fine. Your ability to play a game, your ability to get the highest score or the fastest time is certainly of no importance in this class. But the skills that are required are the ones that you've been gathering throughout your time at Full Sail in the music production program. The skills that are required are your ability to an understanding of music theory, music composition, music production, all the tools that you have available to you, your DAW, your synths and sound libraries, your ability to basically recognize a client's intentions with their product or project, and render it into music. So that we have a couple of different game projects for you to work on. If you are not involved or playing games, we will immerse you in the games industry while you are here. We'll be talking about games and chatting about all sorts of different aspects. But your skills at actually playing games are not a requirement for your success in this class by any means. The other disclaimer would be is a question that I get pretty early on in the class is, do I need to be able to code or program in order to work in the games industry. I'm a music composer. I know audio and I know sound effects and sound design. I want to be involved in the games industry. Do I need to know how to code? And that is a pretty big no overall. Again, game teams, they're the ones that can code and program and make the game itself, but they can't write music to save their lives just as much as you can't write code overall. If you've ever done any programming or built a web page or HTML or any sort of code overall, you probably realize why you are doing music instead of code. It's a very involved, very detailed, heavily, a huge base of knowledge involved in programming. Just in the same way that music theory and understanding of music theory and skill and practice is involved in the music production side of things. So rarely do those two skill sets cross overall. So in the early dawn of game audio or games, game teams had to find a programmer that could hopefully or probably write bad music. Or you found a game composer that could write bad code because it was all one and the same effectively. But that became very obvious that that was not the way to go. And it was much more common to separate the two disciplines so that you had your programmers and they code everything, and your composers or sound designers, audio folks that created all of your audio. So now, there is a technical aspect to the class, certainly. We talk heavily about the creative side and the technical side of the production of music. The creative side is the design, figuring out style and genre and instrumentation and how you are going to record and produce the music, and composing it and actually creating it, formatting it, and bouncing out the WAV files. And that is heavily the world of the composer and dominated by the composer. And then once those WAV files are created, we will talk about the process, the technical side of things. How do your WAV files get into the game? We will be using Wise this month. So you want to make sure that you have a copy of Wise 2016 installed, ready to go. And I'll talk more about that further through the month. But have Wise installed, and in week 3 we'll start getting into more of the technical side of things in the kind of the second half of the month. So we'll take the WAV files that you've created, do something technically to them in the Wise software, and prepare them to work and play back in the game, so that when the next time you play the game, you will hear your custom music and your custom sound effects. So those are two sides of two points that I want to make pretty early on in the class. Number one, you don't actually have to have skills in playing video games to be successful in this class. And number two, you do not have to have skills in programming to be successful in this class or get started in the industry. The skill set that you will build working in the games industry is being able to communicate your ideas to a programmer. You speak more of a creative language, and a programmer speaks more of a technical language. And sometimes those don't mesh too easily. And you start learning how to communicate more in a technical way, your ideas, and then just take care of the creative side to make it all work together. Let me take a quick pause. Please let me know if you have any questions as we're going here, and I'll be back in just a sec. Hold on. All All right, goals of the class. What is our focus? Why are we here? All of that fun stuff. Goals of the class. Number one, first goal, pretty much of the entire degree program, is to write music, is to give you the projects and the experience of composing music for a particular media or format. So we have 2 game projects that you will be working on over the course of the month. You will compose and do the sound design for the first game project called 2D Platformer this month. And hold on just a sec. The first game project, which is 2D Platformer, you will work on in week 1 here. Work on the second music and sound effects for your second game in week 2. That game is called Angry Bots. In week 3, we will take your music and sound effects and apply them into the game using Wise. And then week 4 is you have the ability to wrap everything up, do a final video capture. That'll be the best way of demonstrating your work, having material to add to your portfolio, and have something to show off for the music and the sound effects that you created. So we'll be talking about that flow. We'll be go on to FSO here in a little bit and talk about the rest of the month and how your assignments and all that will break down. So first thing is to have a reason to write music for games, certainly. The next goal of the class, and this is a very important concept for the class, which is called game research. And game research means you should be playing video games. And this is an important element of being involved in the games industry, where it is all fun and games, literally, to play video games. But it's doing that with a critical ear and paying attention to what's actually going on in the background and how the music and sound effects are working. If you are interested in the music industry, you want to be an artist, you want to be a producer, an engineer, work in the business in some form or fashion, you should be paying attention to certainly music. You should be paying attention to all sorts of different types of music, different artists, good music and popular music and bad music, and why is good and popular music not always the same thing, and paying attention to the different artists and producers and songwriters and the engineers and the studios that they recorded in and the production companies or record labels that produced the albums, basically the entire process, because your clients in the music industry, whether they're artists or other musicians or composers, whatever it is, whoever your clients are, speak in terms of previous albums. They will refer to different songwriting techniques. They'll refer to different, hey, did you hear how that kick drum sound, or that cool vocal technique, or whatever aspect of the production of that music. And if you have a large kind of knowledge, a bank of knowledge of different albums and music and processes and techniques, then you have a common language to reference, and it becomes much easier to work on your project. If you're interested in the film industry, you should be paying attention to watching lots and lots of different films, paying attention to their soundtracks, the composer, the director, the producer, the production company, how did they produce it? Films and DVDs have lots of great behind the scenes resources that you can get access to, and basically learning about all sorts of different techniques and approaches for a film soundtrack, because directors and producers speak in terms of previous films and previous soundtracks. So you have that sort of underlying reference to work from. You'll have a common language. It just so happens that if you're interested in working in the games industry, you should be playing tons of video games and paying attention to how the games work, who the composer was, who the game developer was, what technology did they use, how or when did the music change, or why did the music change, What action did you do to make certain sounds happen, or certain what sound effects are playing, and basically all aspects, because clients speak in terms of previous game projects. When working in the film industry and the games industry, it's a bit different than the music industry. Music industry, everybody who you surround yourself with is probably speaks the language of music. They are musicians or understand music in some form or fashion, while a film director or film producer or a game director, a game developer, they may not speak the language of music in the same sort of way. So the having that underlying knowledge of different projects will help you succeed and ultimately make it easier to understand what the client's intentions are. So that means if anybody asks you over the course of this month why you're playing more video games, you answer it's game research, because I'm researching this game for the purposes of the class, and it is an extremely important aspect of the entire process, of course. Goals of the class. Lastly here, with all of the music writing and the game playing, all of those fun things, there's a lot of knowledge involved. There is a lot of learning to be had. Lots of different elements, different processes happening all at the same time. So there's an understanding of it beyond just the music. There is the interactivity of the game. So it's not just composing one 4-minute long song and it plays from beginning to end every single time. You have to determine how the music will interact and how it will play back in the game to kind of understand the full process. You really don't get a full sense, even in a professional scenario, you don't get a real sense of how things are going to sound until you get them into the game and you test them out. So lots of different aspects, different terminology, and different skills to learn. All right, so I'm going to switch over here to FSO and talk my way through it. Have you had an opportunity to download the first week's assignments? Go on to FSO and get access to everything. If you have not, now is a good opportunity to go ahead and download everything and get started. Here in the introduction section, there's a lot of very familiar things I'm sure you've seen over and over again through all of your different classes. But welcome letter, contact info, how to contact FSO support, professionalism policy, late policy, very standard things overall. So make sure you're aware of all of the policies of the class. But let's talk about your first week's assignments, or really more the overview of or the flow of the class, so that, and then we'll get into much more detail with each of these assignments here for week one. Week one, 2D platformer composition. This is your main game composition. Here you have a video and a copy of the game and a PDF to download. Gives you an overview of the game project, and I will discuss this here in a lot more detail with examples in just a few moments, well, a few minutes probably. 2D platformer session preparation. This is a series of videos that kind of go through the process of creating a composition for this project. Gives you lots of detail, kind of a step-by-step ability to follow along and give you some ideas to work from. 2D platformer sound design. So not only are you creating all of the music, but you are creating all of the sound effects for the game. There are 18 sound effects. A lot of these can be done with your voice. We'll take a listen to these sounds and talk about how these will be created. Some of these can be pulled from and designed using sound effects libraries. A lot of them, at least in this instance, also can be done with an open microphone. So, what else? Each week, you have an opportunity for feedback and peer review. So, our next session will be on Tuesday. And I don't think, let's see, when do I have this due? Yeah, so this is due by Wednesday of next week because of the break kind of coming into the next week. Because of the break coming into this week, we extended the deadlines off into next week. And so I'll probably do the feedback and peer review on Thursday of next week. Here in the chat is the discussion extra credit. No, it's just an opportunity for us to load up everybody's projects and take a listen to it to get a bit of feedback and review before submitting it for a final time. You have the opportunity of revising your project and fixing things up before it is due again the final version of the project is due at the end of the month. So everybody is definitely encouraged to submit for the peer review because not only do you get, am I going to be going through the project and I'll load it up in class and be able to go through and point out a whole lot of detail. And if you're available for the live class, you can ask questions and we can discuss your project. But it also benefits everybody else. By seeing everybody else's project, you see different approaches, good things, both good and bad, that you might not have even considered overall. So the more projects that are submitted, and it's all constructive, positive feedback overall, the more that are submitted, the more variations that we have. So definitely are encouraged to submit for feedback and peer review. Each week we have the Tuesday and Thursday virtual classes. So again, because of the new year, the holiday break coming into this week, we didn't have a live class on Tuesday. So this is actually what I would typically present on Tuesday. And I will send out an archive for the second half of this week's material, along with the archive for this class. So back on the regular schedule, on every Tuesday and Thursday, we will have our live class. Typically on the first class of the week, we'll do peer review and we'll talk about the new week's assignments. I'll have to move peer review off next week, but for the following weeks, we'll start with peer review of the previous week's assignments and talking about the new assignments in the new week. And then the second class is an open session for you to come and ask questions. If you want to submit something, we can take a listen to it in whatever form it's in before the final submission. Plus, there's an archive of all sorts of material about the industry and different topics that kind of follow along with our projects. So you can get access to all the PDFs or all the slides as PDFs in that assignment. And last one here is suggested reading and viewing. You should have received a textbook for the class, and there's a couple of suggested chapters for each week. They kind of follow along with our progression through the class, and there's nothing in the books that you wouldn't hear in the class that would be like any testable material or anything that you would need to study or utilize in the class. It's not like I'm hiding any information directly in that text. It just kind of supports overall and follows along with our discussions. Here in the chat, we have a question, where are the archives posted? I post up the archives as announcements on FSO over here. So where the welcome letter pops up, you'll also see each week's archives posted up there. And let's see, I will get this up I typically release them sometime the next day. So our Tuesday class, the archive will be posted up on Wednesday, and our Thursday class, the archive will be posted up by Friday. All right, so that's week one. Week one generally follows, week 1 and 2 generally follows the same progression. Week 2, you start your second game, Angry Bots, with a game composition. You'll also do sound design. Each week you have the opportunity for feedback and review. And then we have the slides for the class and suggested reading. So week 1 and 2, we tackle the music and sound design. Week 3, we get into the software, game audio software called Wise. You should have it installed on your computer and have it have some familiarity with it from last month. Oh, look, I need to turn on week 3 there. So we'll talk about the setup of Wise for both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. And then there's also a chiptune composition. So instead of just sitting in the Wise software the entire week, there is a smaller composition overall. A chiptune composition, it is not interactive, it doesn't loop or anything like that, but it does, since we're talking more about the technology, and talking about the kind of newer technology that's available. We go all the way back to the original Nintendo system and are creating a composition utilizing the same or similar restrictions from the original Nintendo system. So that is upcoming in week 3 and, can't get to it, week 4. Week 4, you have game captures. You will, by the end of the month, you will have 2 fully working games with your complete custom music and sound effects. And you will then create a video that's about a minute or 2 long, demonstrating your music and sound effects working in the game. By then, that'll show that you created the music, you revised the music, you created the sound effects, used Wise to put them into the game, tested everything out, and had a video to demonstrate your project. There's a discussion post that allows everybody to share their final game project to give you an opportunity to check out everybody else's work. And then there are 2 10-question tests. The 2D platformer composition description and the Angry Bots composition description. These are not tests as in the type of tests you would study for because you have all of the answers. It's basically a format for me to gather a bunch of information about your projects. It gives me the opportunity, or has you uploading the video capture and answering a few questions about your composition, like the key that you're in, your tempo and your time signature, and the chord progressions that you used, the instrumentation that you used, and a bit of analysis of your project and the success of the project as a whole. So that will wrap out and wrap up week 4. And we'll certainly talk about a lot more about that as we go along. But make sure you download the new assignments each week as soon as you can. And here's the textbook. Again, you should have received a copy of the physical textbook, Composer's Guide to Game Music by Winifred Phillips. It is a great text that discusses more of the creative and design approach to a music soundtrack for a game, along with the business aspects of it, of the role of a game composer in a game development team. All right, so we are going to talk about our first game. We'll talk about 2D platformer, your first game project of the month, and we will provide examples and talk about how the music will sound and the overall approach to the first project here. So let me go ahead and load up a few things to get started. So again, when you download the 2D platformer game composition zip file, like the assignment download, you get a couple of things here. This is what comes in the folder. You get a PDF that describes the assignment as a whole. You get a copy of the game itself, and you get a copy of this video, so you can reference. You don't always have to play the game. You can just reference this video instead. And try that. When you launch the game, this configuration window pops up. You can change the screen resolution. This basically changes the size of the game window. You can turn windowed on and off, and if you turn it off, it'll be full screen. If you turn it on, it's in a window. You could maybe try changing the graphics quality, although it's a pretty not very graphic intensive game. So that might not provide too much difference or change. So this is what the game looks like here. Let's see if I can let this run. All right, I'm just going to let the game, the video play here for a little bit, and I'll be right back, and we'll chat about the game.
I say, Obin. Huh. Huh. Keep it classy. Bring it on. Huh. Bombs away. Keep it classy. I say, Obin. Bring it on. Huh. Keep it classy. Huh. I say, Obin. Bring it on. I say, Obin. Bring it on. Keep it classy. Oh. Ow, 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 ow. I say, Obin.
All right, so as you can see, the game is a pretty ridiculous concept overall. Again, the game is called 2D Platformer. It is made by Unity Games. They make the game technology that is used to create the game, and this is one of their demo projects. It's called 2D Platformer because it is a 2D game, meaning it only goes left and right and up and down. You don't go into it like 3D. And it is a platform game where you're mainly running and jumping between different platforms. And in this case, you are a bean with a monocle and a top hat and a bazooka. And you are going to save, this is London here, from the alien invasion of these cute red and green aliens. You can tell it's London because London Bridge, it has fallen down. There's Big Ben over here, all broken up, and there's the London Eye. So again, it's a pretty lighthearted, ridiculous, kind of wacky concept. You could see that this would maybe be a mobile game or what is often known as a casual game of just a couple of people playing for a few minutes, playing a couple of different levels. This is by no means a full game. There's no ending to it. The score just keeps going up and up. But it is very indicative of the types of kind of little game projects that you would get over the course of the game development. They'd send you a level or a couple levels here and there and say, okay, this is going to be level 5, and it's what we have done right now, and so here you can get started on this particular aspect of it. All right, so the music for this, let's talk about the music soundtrack, and then we'll also talk about the sound design. The style and approach of the music, the genre of the music, I leave up to you in this first project because of the overall new approach of the composition of the music. I leave the whole kind of production process up to you. There are a couple of restrictions overall, but the genre and choice of instrumentation is really up to you. Now, it does have to be upbeat, kind of a faster pace overall to keep up the energy of this kind of action shooter game. You again should be lighthearted, nothing too depressing or kind of slow and too laid back maybe. There's a couple of different aspects that you can pull from. It is set in London, so you could have maybe a British influence there, whether it is a kind of campy British comedy kind of feel, or whether there's also the alien invasion, so you could go for maybe a 50s sci-fi kind of feel to it, again pulling from the lightheartedness of the overall project. So along with this video and the game, you also get the PDF. And the PDF gives you all sorts of information about the project, a lot of it which is kind of summarizing the stuff I'll be discussing now. Project overview talks about how the music will be broken down, how it will play back, and I'll certainly get into that with examples here in just a bit. Game overview. It says here, 2D platformer games have a long pedigree in the games industry. Classics like Super Mario Bros., Donkey Kong, and Metroid were 2D platformer games, to modern varieties like Limbo and Braid and Jetpack Joyride, which still, even though all the way back in the history of games, platformers have been successful, they still do make up a certain and common portion of the game market today. Music style. Again, I have this sentence here that says Monty Python meets Mars Attacks, or Benny Hill versus the Body Snatchers. So you can pull from that British influence. You can pull from the sci-fi alien invasion influence. You don't have to, but it gives you some other ideas to pull from. Your choice of instrumentation, the overall genre of your music is more left in your court. The instrumentation, you do have to have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and it should probably be more than just 4 instruments. You would have your drum kit or your rhythm, the bass line, an instrument to support the harmony in the kind of lower registers, your harmonic progression. So that's probably made up of a couple of different instrument layers, outlining the overall progression, and then a strong melodic lead. That's going to provide the most variation, the most difference in your composition overall. So a melodic voice that develops over the course of the different cues is definitely important. So this is really what I want to get to is the asset list to discuss how the music is built for the game. As I said earlier, music for a game does not exist in just one long file. You're not just bouncing out one file for your composition here. It is made up of 9 different files that play back in different ways according to what's going on in the game. You can really think about this as 3 categories of 3 different variations. So you have the game is mainly built off of the idea of intros, loops, and endings. This is a very, very common approach for game music and game sounds. There is some sort of intro so that the music doesn't just cut on. There's some, and in like classics like Super Mario Brothers, it's da 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 da, and then the main loop comes in. There is a loop that can be just a couple of bars, or it can be a couple of minutes long, and then there's an ending. Often there's a win end, like a winning and a losing ending piece of music. In our case, there's no winning. The game never really ends. The only way that you can reach an ending is that you lose all of your health and you die, you lose a life, and you respawn and come back and try again. So there are 3 intros. Those are each going to be 2 bars long. Everything is going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files when you bounce them out, WAV files. And the intros do not loop. The intros are 2 bars that get played only one time through, and then it gets into your main loops. You have 3 main loops. Those are each 8 bars. Again, they're 16-bit 44.1 stereo, and they are set up to loop. So let's do this. Let's go back to my gameplay here. When the game starts, your character kind of drops onto the platform here, and the game will randomly choose one of those 3 intro files and play it through the entire 2 bars. So the game starts, and the game says, okay, what do I do? And the computer looks at the code, and it says, all right, there should be 3 intro files. They're named music underscore intro underscore 01.wave, 02.wave, 03.wave. They have to be named exactly like this. They're going to be 2 bars long. They're going to be formatted like this, and they're going to be set up in a particular location. So randomly choose one and play it all the way through those 2 bars. So the game starts. It plays. Let's say it chooses. Intro 3 here. So the game starts, plays intro 3, and it plays it for 2 bars. Now your game knows nothing about your music. It doesn't know what tempo you're at, what time signature you're at, bars or beats or anything. It just knows when the first 1 or 0 happens and the last 1 or 0. When all the bits run out, it knows that it stops. So it randomly plays intro 3, plays it until the 2 bars run out, and then it says, okay, what do I do now? And the computer looks at the code, and it says, all right, there should be 3 main loops there. Randomly choose one of them and play it. So this time it randomly chooses main loop 1. So it goes from intro 3 to main loop 1. And it plays that for 8 bars. It knows nothing about your music, just plays the first bit all the way to the last bit, and when it gets to the end, and it says, okay, what do I do? Now, it's doing this seamlessly in the background. It's not actually pausing the game or anything like that. But it gets to the end of that first main loop, and it says, okay, what do I do now? All right, randomly choose another main loop, and keep playing that. Play that. Now it chooses main loop 3, and it can choose them in any order that it wants. For as long as you're actually playing the game, it is randomly choosing one of these 3 main loop cues. So it chooses main loop 1, then it chooses main loop 3, then it goes back to 1 again, then it chooses main loop 2, then it goes back, plays 2, 3 times in a row, then it goes to 3, then it goes to 1, then it goes 3, 2, I mean, just whatever order that it wants. It is completely random, and the main part of your soundtrack is made up with these 3 8-bar loops that are randomizing and playing around. So, the game starts, and it randomly chooses an intro, plays through that, then it randomly chooses a main loop, plays through that, and keeps doing that all the way until the game is over. The only way that the game is over, at least currently in this setup, is if you lose all of your health. Now, you may not have noticed there's a health bar above the character that shows how much health they have left. And when they run out of health, they're going to lose the game, or at least lose this round, and they'll respawn and start off back over again. So the game is constantly also trying to figure out if you've lost all your health. And as soon as you have, then it is going to immediately cut off the previous main loop and then play through one of the endings. I'll just fast forward it here. So right now, the character has like little to no health here. And as soon as he takes that last bit of damage, falls down into the toxic sludge below. Like drops the bazooka. Oops. Drops the bazooka. The hat falls off, and he falls down into the sludge. So at this exact moment, it has been playing through all these main loops, plays through and randomly chooses each one of them. As soon as you lose that last bit of health, it's going to cut off whatever main loop was playing. And you're not guaranteed where you're going to be. You're not going to be guaranteed at which bar or beat, or it's going to transition on in sync with anything. It's going to just hard cut off of whatever main loop it was on and immediately transition into one of your 3 ending cues. It's going to randomly choose an ending, play it for 2 bars, play it through this whole ending section, and then hopefully it'll end, and your next intro will start back up. It'll randomly choose an intro, and then the whole process will start over again. One intro plays, randomly chooses main loops all the way through the game until you run out of health, and then it randomly chooses an ending and plays it out. So, do not think about this as 9 different files. Think about it as one composition. It has 3 different sections, intros, main loops, and endings, and each of those have 3 different variations. Now, the variations need to sound similar enough to each other that they feel like they come from the same song. It needs to feel like the same band playing the same instruments all the way through this similar composition. The variation comes in, it's going to be the same key, the same tempo, the same time signature, the same instrumentation. There's a lot of it that maintains continuity? Yeah, sure. All the way through the game, so that it helps maintain and feel like one cohesive piece of music. So choose the key that you're in, choose the tempo and time signature, choose the instruments, and maintain that through the composition. Then the differences will happen in the composition itself. You'll have variations in the drum pattern, in the rhythm. You'll have variations in the bass line, variation in the chord progression, and they don't need to be massive changes, but they will create slight changes overall. And most strongly, you will have variation in the melody. This will create the most difference and will provide the most evolution of the music as it plays along. Here in the chat, can I add or take away instruments to create variations? I wouldn't necessarily say add or take away. You can get away with that if it's not a lead instrument as much, if it's not too forward in the mix. Typically, a better way of thinking about it is something like you can have different instruments play the lead at different times or in different cues. So think about it as an instrument taking a step forward, and you hear it a bit more, and then it should still kind of be there in the background when another instrument comes forward. You can add or take away some like elements of percussion can work. You wouldn't want a whole section or a whole instrument to necessarily come and go. So the more focus on it there is, the harder it is to add it or take it away. And ultimately, it comes down when you hear it all together in the game. You could certainly try it and see if it works or not. The things that you are watching out for are things that will make it feel like the music stumbles as it transitions from one thing to the next. Strong changes by having different tempo or time signature will create weird rhythmic issues. Having things in completely different keys will cause all sorts of harmonic issues. That also goes for intros to the loops to the endings. You need to have consistent instrumentation in the intros and endings also. Especially your melodic lead and the rhythm, the drums. I often have things like the drums just don't appear in the endings. It's like the drummer just gave up and stopped playing at the endings. Also understand that intro 1 is not always going to go to main loop 1, which is not always going to go to ending 1. You have to, and this is really where the challenge of the composition is. You have to make sure that intro 1 can play to main loop 2, which plays to ending 3, and listen to it in all of its combinations to make sure it works. So that's a lot of chat on all that. Let me see. Did I load up my session here? Let me load up some examples here. Like this. See if this loads up. All right. Let's see here. All right. What I have here is each track is a different student submission. You see here are the 9 files that each person submits. We have 3 main loops. This whole kind of column over here, these are all main loops. You can see that they're each a little bit longer. These are 8 bars. These are all intros. These are all 2 bars long. And these are all the endings. And these are all 2 bars long. They're only in this weird order because of alphabetically, this is the way they import with endings, intros, and main loops. So we'll start out by listening to the main loops. This gives us the most indication of what things are going to sound like. And I have a couple of different examples. I probably won't play through all of these, but give me a couple of things to work with. All right. I think this should work. Actually, no. Let me check. All right. Let's see. Is that broadcasting? Can you hear that? And you can still hear me and all that stuff? Excellent. All right. So, an 8-bar loop. You should be able to hear from one to the next. There's a slight bit of variation, a little bit of change in the drums, certainly the lead line and the chord progression. Each one of these is set up to loop and also seamlessly transition to the next one. So when it reaches the end here, it should be able to return back to the top, no problem, with no pops or clicks or anything. So whenever you reach the end of a particular main loop, you basically have a three-pronged fork in the road. You can either jump back to the top of the same one, you can jump to the second one, or you could jump to the beginning of the third one. You would probably be best served to always start on the tonic. That way, you know, wherever you wander off to, you can always resolve back to the tonic. That kind of gives you a kind of a signpost to return back to. 8 bars long with similar tempos and time signatures should make them all seamlessly transition from one to the next. You want to make it as invisible as possible when moving between them. Here are 3 intros. Intros are meant to build up, to increase in the energy level before they resolve or hit on the downbeat of the main loop. One thing that works well for intros is subdividing the beat so that you kind of increase energy overall. I like this. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Subdividing the beat like that will help increase the energy level when bringing up well, kind of heading towards the end of the intro files, where you need to be at the same instrumentation and volume and power level by the end of the intros going into the main loops. This is what it would sound like going from an intro to a main loop here. Again, this can happen in any sort of order. This is intro 3 to main loop 1. And you might have heard there's an issue with the crash symbol at the end here. Listen to the very last crash here. Gets cut off. So you're going to want to watch out for a crash symbol at the end of a particular cue. Watch out for things that get cut off like this. The easiest thing is just not to use it, or else you have to do things like put a crash at the beginning of each one of the cues, or like chop this crash in half and have the tail at the beginning of each one of them. But that kind of causes more issues than it fixes. So 3 intros. The other thing is your intros should probably hang on some 4 or 5 chord or suspend somewhere so then they resolve back to the tonic. You should not end on the tonic of your intro, or else it'll just repeat again, that same chord going into the main loops. So kind of hang there a bit to resolve back to the start of any one of those main loops. And then endings. First and foremost, endings need to end. Notice that these really don't end. They're going to get cut off at the very end. These down here have a little bit more tail to make sure they reach silence before they get cut off. So endings, though, need to resolve. They need to take the energy and power from the main loops and bring it down and resolve it to a nice resolution or ending. Here are 3 endings. See, if I do this again, that cymbal crash gets just cut off just a little bit. So watch out for that. They are strong endings, and they do take the same instrumentation from your main loops, intros through the endings, and resolves it all nicely. Let's take a listen to another one. These first 2 are more acoustic instrumentation. And I've got a couple more that are more kind of synthetic, gamey sounding. 3 main loops. With slight changes to each one. So changes again. The instrumentation is consistent all the way through, but changes to the melodic line, the rhythm, the harmony provides most of the change. So here are 3 intros. Again, it's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Builds everything up, uses the same or similar instrumentation to create a seamless ending, or sorry, a seamless intro, and then 3 endings. I think the shave and the haircut in the second one's a little too obvious overall, but does resolve everything nicely and comes to an ending. Notice that these end, they don't use the entire 2 bars. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So they also give a little bit of ending here. The requirement for the project is that the ending cues need to be 2 bars. That means that the music needs to end within 2 bars. It doesn't have to use the entire 2 bars. Sometimes it's good to just end on like beat 1 of bar 2, where you would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, and you would just kind of hang on that last chord until it resolves out. Or you can, if you need the entire 2 bars, then you can use a little bit of extra time for anything like instrument decay or reverb tails or fade outs or things like that. The music needs to end within 2 bars, but if you need a little bit extra room to bounce these out, you can certainly do that. I've heard other cool things in the endings. Remember, you did just like lose the game at that point or lost that round. So you could do things with dissonance or clashing notes or rhythms. I've heard things like the whole composition is in major and then the last chord is minor, or the last chord is some horrendous dissonant chord. Or things like everything ends up in a whole bunch of distortion or hits one big delay and bounces out. There's all sorts of interesting things you can do with the endings because the endings don't immediately transition into anything else. It takes a couple of seconds before the game restarts. Here's another one. This one goes for more of the sci-fi kind of feel. It's got a theremin in it. Some good brass lines. changes to the rhythm. Certainly strong changes to the lead line. Here are 3 intros. I think these are a little too random. They don't have a strong upward kind of direction to build. Here are 3 endings. Hits that last chord and kind of resolves out or decays out. All right, let me play. Let's see, we got a couple more here. Jump down. Well, what's this one? This one I think has a stronger, this is way more synthy and has a strong lead line with a good pace to it overall. So you can get away with more consistency in the rhythm and the pace with a strong melodic lead. Three intros. These certainly build up the pacing overall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Builds up that energy, and then 3 endings that just barely end before the end. And let me play this last one down here. Three main loops. Yeah, a vibe from Sonic, definitely. This one gives me a feel like a kind of a Super Nintendo racing game or something. Mario Kart. Absolutely. All right, 3 intros. And 3 endings. All right. So hopefully this gives you some solid examples to work from and gives you a good direction. One other aspect that I want to bring up another session. Where am I? This one. The ones that I just played for you are the final bounces. This session is more of a production session, composition session that shows you how you might approach this type of composition. So let me take care of a few things here. Read out all those. Hide all those. Okay. So when you start this project, my suggestion on how you might get started is you create a brand new session. You hopefully, listening to the music, it gets you inspired with some ideas. You can figure out specifications for your project, like what's your tempo, what's your time signature, what key are you going to be in, maybe getting some ideas of instrumentation. So the first track that I've created here is a guide track. This is a MIDI track. It's just a bunch of blank regions. Isn't actually doing anything except for creating guide regions for each one of my different files. So all I did to create these regions is I went to my pencil tool and I created a region, and then I dragged it out to however long it needs to be. And then I renamed it. Did I rename it here? Whatever. I went over here and renamed it. So I created those, and I made 3 here that are 2 bars long. And I leave a little gap in between, so when I bounce, they're not like right on top of each other. Then I did 3 for 8-bar loops, my main loops, and 3 2-bar regions for my endings. And this just, again, just gives me a guide for creating each one of those particular cues, so I know where they're going to be at. Then I start, I typically load up a piano patch, and we'll just start writing basic progressions, maybe getting some melodic ideas. A lot of times it's just getting the ideas out as quickly as possible. It's probably not going to make much sense or make it into the final composition, but it just starts getting ideas into the session. And then I'll start choosing instruments that will work with my ideas. And then start building them out one at a time. Of course, I just jumped to having all of it here. So let me unhide these. And so like I start out with my drums. And by having my instruments laid out here and having my guide regions laid out at the top, the guide regions basically guide things vertically. My tracks guide things horizontally. And it gives me a grid for each one of these instruments. So I know that I'll have the same instruments across all of my intros, main loops, and endings, and I will have the correct bars and beats or loops set up to make this work. So I'd start out with something like a drum kit here. Let's see. So I started out with a pattern to work from. I did a piano part, added in organ, added in the tuba for the bass. Where's that tuba? Tuba. There it is. I recorded a guitar. And then this bluegrass banjo was the lead line. So, and I get a basic outline of my progression, and then I would go on to my next one doing similar types of things. On this one, the guitar takes the lead. I think this guitar line here takes the lead, and the banjo is now in the background. Pay no attention to all of my clipping meters. This is not mixed, and I'm messing around with all the levels. Oops. And then the third one, I think the piano comes in for the lead, and the guitar takes the background and along with the banjo. So those are 3 main loops. Here are 3 intros. Again, with a little silence in between. Again, as long as I have my guide regions up here and my tracks across here, I basically know where each instrument's going to fit, and if it's all in the same key and the same tempo and time signature, it should all kind of fit together. Here are 3 endings. So I just wanted to show you a different approach, or a solid approach for this composition. Again, please let me know if you have any questions as you're working along with this, and peer review is a great way to submit your projects, get some feedback overall. A couple of suggestions here. Compose interesting loops. Make sure that you use the entire 8 bars to develop your melodic idea. Quite often I will get a 4-bar loop that just is stated again twice, or like repeated twice, to make it 8 bars. Or a 2-bar loop that repeats 4 times, or I've even had a 1-bar loop that just repeats 8 times to make 8 bars. It's going to be repetitive enough because of the looping and the randomized files, so don't make it even more repetitive by repeating the same idea within an 8-bar phrase. Make sure that transitions happen fluidly. Listen to all of the different combinations of intros to main loops to endings. Listen to intro to main loop 1, 2, and 3, or intro 1 to main loop 1, 2, and 3, intro 2 to main loop 1, 2, and 3, and just kind of listen to all the different combinations to get a sense of how they will play back together. Keep the same tempo. Different tempos and time signatures will cause all sorts of rhythmic havoc in your mix. Continuous loops. You make sure that the files that you bounce do not have this kind of hiccup or restart as the loop starts over again. Always listen to how the files transition. You want to make it as seamless and smooth as possible. And the overall mix, you want to make sure that your intros and your main loops and your endings are consistent in their volume and their overall levels, so that you don't have big jumps as they transition from one to the next. Then you'll take a couple of screenshots, and here's information on how to submit everything. So hopefully that, again, gives you a solid direction for this composition, which is that. So again, yeah, let me know if you have any questions as you progress through the assignment. Now, switching over to the sound design side of this. Sound design for this game is can be pretty straightforward, with a lot of the sound effects being done with your voice, because they are what are known as vocalizations or efforts. Things like ouches and taunts and jumps. So when you download this assignment, you get a couple of things. Where is my version of this? You get the PDF, which is this. And you also get a folder of the original sound effects, which is this. Now, these are a copy of the original 18 sound effects that you will replace. And you can use these as reference. These are the sounds that you hear in the game. So you will make your own versions of these. And the way I suggest that you approach this project is create a brand new session. And create an audio track in that session. And on this audio track, go get all of those WAV files and dump them into a track. Place them all on the same track. They're going to be in all sorts of different sample rates, so you want to convert the files. Convert all the files to your session sample rate, and then you'll probably take some time to like separate these out. I'm not going to have you watch me do that, but make a little room in between them, and then create a whole bunch of tracks down below. I create typically 4 or 5 tracks, and then you'll build your sound design directly below this. So you can use the original files as reference. What do they sound like? What is the waveform like? How long is the file? How loud is the file? What does it do? What's the overall decay of it and shape of it? And then build your own versions. The assignment talks about the sound effects libraries. You have access to Westar Music, which you should be familiar with acquiring assets from. There's a sound design or a sound effects section where you can pull sound effects from. There's also freesound.org, which is an online kind of community, Creative Commons driven site for free sounds. It is a huge repository of sounds. There is a whole lot of very bad sounds on there, but there's also a whole bunch of very good sounds on there. And so you're going to have to wade your way through to find some useful stuff if you don't find it on Westar Music. So I will completely cheat here, and of course this is not what you would do, but it just gives me something to visualize this with. Let's say you created your sound design and you built your own bomb explosion on these 4 tracks, right? Obviously you wouldn't just copy the same thing over and over again, but you would build your own stuff. You would mute out this track. Make sure you do not bounce the original sounds from the game back into it. What am I saying? But bounce your own version. Do not include the original, and you can go through and build each of your sound effects and bounce them out one at a time. Do we have to record, or can we just use the Westar sound samples? For most of these, I don't expect you to go record a whole bunch of sounds of explosions and rocket launchers and all the other stuff. But some of the vocalizations, which I'll play here in just a sec, can be done quite easily by just opening up your microphone. But you don't have to do that. If you want to just pull sounds and samples from Westar or wherever your larger repository might be, you can certainly do that also. So let's actually listen to these sounds and get a sense of what they are. I don't have very good audio control or volume control over how loud these play, but so this first one will probably be quite loud. This is the bomb explosion. Wasn't too bad. I think that is a ridiculously long explosion. That is when, in the game, you can pick up and drop bombs. That's when the bomb explodes. It's a very long explosion. Yours doesn't have to be 7 seconds long, but you can use it as a reference overall. This is a bomb fuse. It sounds like this. That is when you drop the bomb, it doesn't immediately explode. Takes about a second or so, plays that sound, and then allows you to get away from it, and it explodes. Bomb pickup. That's kind of like this arcadey type of sound. What it doesn't sound like is you picking something up. It's way more just kind of, arcade kind of sound, a synthetic kind of sound. It doesn't have to be like that. You can come up with your own version overall. But it doesn't sound necessarily like you just picking something up, which doesn't sound like much anyway. Here's bomb set down.
Bombs away.
All right. So it's a line of dialogue. It says bombs away. You don't have to, you can just open up your microphone, record bombs away, and, or you can make it a sound effect, whatever you want to do. You don't have to say bombs away. You can come up with something else. And with all the lines of dialogue, it's much more custom and fun and unique to make up your own stuff. These are enemy death. This is when the little aliens die. They get hit. These are real quick sounds. Right? So you open up your microphone, you go, record that a couple of times. Gunshot. This is when you fire the weapon. When you left click the mouse, it'll trigger this sound. Notice that sounds more like a gunshot and not a kind of bazooka or rocket launcher like the character actually holds. You do not need a long kind of rocket launch kind of sound because the player is going to be hitting the button very, very quickly. And you do not want these to stack up and overlap. So a quick, sharp gunshot kind of sound will work. Or some sort of blast. Health pickup. Again, it's a pretty synthetic, arcadey type of sound. This is when you get the little parachutes that come down that have med packs in them, or health kits. Jump 1, 2, and 3.
Huh. Huh. Huh.
All right. So 3 variations of a jump. Notice it's also the jump up. This is the kind of when you're hoisting yourself up, not the land. Sometimes I'll get feet like hitting the ground. So watch out. It's a pretty large jump in the game. So you want the jump up, not the land back down. Here is ouch 1, 2, and 3.
Oh. Ow. Ow.
This is when the player gets hit by the bad guys. Again, open up your microphone, go ooh, ow, ouch, a couple of times. Here is 3 taunts.
Keep it classy. Bring it on. I say, old bean.
Keep it classy. Bring it on. I say, old bean. Right? So 3 lines of dialogue. And you don't have to say exactly what they say. You don't have to do it in a British accent. But make up your own lines, record exactly what they say, whatever variation you want to do on it. You can do exactly what they do or come up with your own version of it. Again, have fun with it, make it your own, and you'll find it becomes quite entertaining when you get it into the game. So take the original WAV files, put them into a Logic session. Import the original sound effects, build your own sound effects below, mute in the original sound effects, do not include them, and bounce everything out. Check it out, see how it sounds. You might also want to import your music into your sound effects session, or maybe the other way around, your sound effects into your music session, whichever one you finish, and just check the levels. You don't want your music to completely bury your sound effects or the other way around. All right. So that's our sound design. I just want to introduce your game project for next week. This is called Angry Bots. It is a third-person shooter You are a mercenary infiltrating a robot factory, and the robots are none too happy that you're there, and they attack. Each one of the robots is going to have its own music theme, and the game is heavily based off of the idea of ambience and action. So it goes from lower intensity ambient music as your character's wandering around and navigating through the level, and then when any of these robots come out to attack, action music will come in and play. So it's how do we transition from a lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music. You will also have multiple pieces of music playing at the same time. So we'll talk about how do we keep them in sync and how do we keep the game reacting to all of the different actions on screen. You'll be also creating all of the sound effects. So that's robots, explosions and weapons and technology and all of those fun sound designy kind of things. So that's an introduction to your game next week. And that should be enough from me today. Gives us lots of, loaded you up with lots of different information. And if you have any questions, please post them up in the chat. We got one here. And says, is there a good market for new game composers, or do most gaming companies stick to the same composers for all their games? There is a huge independent market. Through the magic of the internet and mobile devices, people are able to distribute their games for much more cheaply. And there is a huge market for independent games and lots of different developers. I would say that there is a smaller pool of composers working at the very top end in the largest, biggest games overall. They are going for big name talent, very established talent, but those people are pulled from often from a more independent market. They either come from different disciplines, maybe they're film composers and they start working on games, but there are a lot of opportunities in game composition. Where in film, most of the movies the general public sees are created by Hollywood or are created with major budgets, and they have large, a small short list of people that do all the composition for those films, because it takes so much to release these films and put them up in a movie theater. But when you can release a game and you don't have to put it in a box and sell it in a store, and you can sell it to somebody online, it allows for a much lower bar of entry for people to create a game and sell their game online. And that allows for a lot of newer composers to get into the market and work their way up to bigger and bigger projects overall. So, yes, with any sort of entertainment media, at the very, very top, there is a much shorter list of people working in that world, but the amount of people and the amount of opportunity in a smaller independent game market allows for a lot of newer folks, new blood to get into the industry overall. So my last lecture of the month, I talk about the industry and getting started and finding jobs and finding clients and keeping clients and getting paid and all of that fun stuff. So it would definitely address a lot of these different aspects. But one, like I said earlier on, one big purpose of the class is to introduce you to this side of work and to show you that there's quite a bit of stuff going on out there. With all of the different games and with all the different systems and the ability to basically you have a game store in your pocket with iOS or Android smartphones and tablets and all that stuff. And all of those different games need music and sound effects. So, absolutely. So I will post the archive up here, and I'll actually post this archive up and post up the other one for that makes up for our little time off there. And we'll meet again on Tuesday. If you have any questions, send them to me and we can get started and discuss whatever you want. If you want to submit something for peer review, if I have some people submit, I can maybe do some of that on Tuesday. But I know I didn't really make the deadline until Wednesday. So we'll pick back up next week and we'll discuss everything then. So if you have any more questions, I'll stick around for a bit more. But other than that, have a good evening and I will see you again next week. Thanks.